Well, it's officially spring, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's time to start planting in the garden. As an avid gardener, I spend most of my winter anticipating the signs of spring to let me know when it is game on in the garden. And I've had two really important signs this week that it is safe to go ahead and plant. Now, certainly you can go out and check your soil temperature, but if you're like me and you enjoy the study of phenology, which is like leaning on nature to let you know when it's time, pay attention, because there are things happening right now, at least in my zone where I live. We're in 6B, I'm in southeastern Pennsylvania, and there have been some big signs. So here's two that happened. The first happened when I looked out this big window and noticed in the yard that there were a ton of robins in the yard. And when I see the robins show up, this is big news because robins are unique. They actually don't have the beaks to be able to open up bird seed. So you won't see them at your feeders like you will with your little songbirds. They're always looking for worms. Robins won't show up and start feeding on worms until the soil is warm enough that the worms can work their way up. They've been hibernating down below under the frost. Now it's warm enough that they can work their way up, and lots of microbial activity is happening in the soil. And the presence of the worms is indicated to me because the robins are here to eat them. Robins have the most unbelievable eyesight. They can see worms just popping up out of the soil in a way that you and I would never see. And when they see the worms, they can snatch them up and eat them. It is my understanding that robins can eat like 10 to 15 feet of worms a day, which is ridiculous. And so they're constantly eating. And they will show up and start feeding on them when the soil is warm enough. Coincidentally, the other thing that happens is that forsythia starts to bloom. My big forsythia in the front yard is just starting to bud, but the one in the back, which has more southern exposure, is in full bloom right now. And that's a really cool sign because they won't bloom until your soil temperature reaches that 50 to 55 degree mark. Now, air temperature has a little bit to do with it as well, but the indication of worms being here and forsythia blooming means it is game on for garden. But that's only for the early garden. That's only for the things that you're gonna be putting in like peas, onions, and spinach. Onion sets can go out now. The soil is workable and we can go ahead and plant those things. But we can't safely plant others until we reach other milestones. So I want to share with you what some of the other milestones are because I think phenology is really cool and I do love the Farmer's Almanac. And if you're relying upon a calendar date, you might find that it leads you astray. In addition to knowing that the robins are here and the forsythia are blooming, there's just some really good things you can pay attention to. A really good example of this is just kind of like taking a walk around your neighborhood or your yard and paying attention to what's happening week by week. What's in bud, what's in bloom, what leaves are starting to come out, what animals have returned that were in hibernation. I will walk down the street to the creek near us and just listen to those peepers. It is just one of the happiest sounds that I can experience. I mean, it just gives me great joy. The peepers are back, spring is here. Now, you can certainly check soil temperatures if you wish, and you can do that very easily with a thermometer, but don't check them just on one particular day. You could have one day when the soil temperature is good and the next day when it's really cold. So I recommend doing like a 5-day test. Don't test in the afternoon, test in the morning after the sun is up. So like maybe 9 o'clock would be a good time, and check the same location 5 days in a row and take the average of those 5 days. If the average of those 5 gets you above 50, it's time for that first phase of gardening. Again, we're just talking about peas, onion sets, and spinach, early stuff. Now, I had to make a couple of notes of some of the other things because some of them I know and have committed to memory, and a couple surprised me because I didn't know them. So I want to share these with you. The things that I knew came from living in a farming community among the Amish who pay attention to these kinds of things and pay attention to what nature tells them is time to go ahead and start certain things for planting. My grandfather was also a fan of phenology, and he would talk about certain things and point out what was in bloom or what was in bud and how that affected nature. I found that really uninteresting when I was a child, but I find it fascinating now. I wish I could go back and have time to have those conversations with him that I just didn't appreciate when I was younger. Okay, so two of the very first that you can look for, I already spoke about one of them, the forsythia. Forsythia means you can go ahead and put in peas, onion sets, and your spinach. Crocus blooming also means that you can look at planting lettuce, parsnips, radish. My crocus are also blooming, so this is all good. All of these things can happen. They say that when your daffodils bloom, you can plant beets, chard, and carrots. And when your dandelions bloom, you can put your potatoes in. So that's a fascinating thing. Potatoes need a certain soil temperature. It happens to be the same soil temperature that dandelions do. And all of the things I'm talking about are either things that you can plant on your property or naturally happen. Dandelions are happening in my yard, no matter what, because we don't spray. Okay, maple leaves are a really good indication. When they start to leaf out, the very beginning of maple leaves leafing out when they're small, you can go ahead and start planting some of your perennial flowers. But you'll have to wait until you have full-size leaves to do maybe a little bit more sensitive things like morning glory, for example. And this is like an old farmer saying, but when the oak leaves are the size of a squirrel's ear, you can go ahead and plant your corn. I think that one's kind of funny. When your apple tree blossoms happen, you can go ahead and plant bush beans. Who knew? And when your quince starts to blossom, you can transplant your cabbage and your broccoli from inside to out. Now my cabbage and my broccoli are really full size and they need to go out soon. So I hope that that happens really soon. Okay, when your apple blossoms have blossomed out and begin to fall, it is safe to go ahead and put out pole beans and cucumbers. It needs to be a little warmer, and that'll happen when your apple blossoms fall off. Well, when your lilacs bloom, it is safe to go ahead and put out some of your more tender flowers, annuals and perennials. And it's also a good time to go ahead and plant your squash. Squash is a little finicky. I like to start it inside to give it a jump start, because if I start it outside, it just takes too long and I don't get any until like mid to late summer. So I want to get a jump start on that, and I will start them indoors, but I'm not moving them out until the lilacs bloom. I have lily of the valley on my property. This is a new one for me. I didn't know this until today, but apparently when my lily of the valley blooms, it is safe to put my tomatoes out. Now I usually just wait until the second week of May and I'm safe, but I'm gonna look and see if that lines up with when my lily of the valley blooms, and if it does, we're putting tomatoes outside. So bearded iris are a good indicator for peppers and eggplant. They need pretty warm temperatures, and so do bearded iris. So when they are blooming, you can put your peppers and your eggplant outside. And the last one I have for you is the peonies. When your peonies are in blossom, you can move your melons and your cantaloupe out. That should happen around the same time as your bearded iris. Mine bloom at the same time. But those are just some little things that I have either saved or just learned from looking through the Farmer's Almanac, and a couple I found online as I was kind of making my notes for today. I just think that that's a really interesting thing to pay attention to. And I think it's important because not just for gardeners, but just for everybody. We need to pay attention a little bit more to what's going on in our surroundings around us. I think there's lots of people that are so focused on going to work and doing what they have to do, raising their families, and I understand that. Having worked full-time and raised a family, I get it, we're busy. But I would encourage you to take a few deep breaths and walk down the street and look at what's in bud and what's in bloom. And I want to encourage you to plant a little something. Everybody says, oh, I don't have a big backyard, I don't have room to garden. Everybody has room to do a little something. I have friends that live in small apartments and they grow more food on their deck than some people do who have a full acre to work with. Okay, I can't have this conversation with you without talking about fake spring, or what I call false spring. I did a video recently and I talked about how this was the first of many springs that I'm having. And that's for real where I live in Southeast Pennsylvania. We can have, they say like in with a lion, March comes in like a lion and goes out like a lamb. Well, it comes in and out multiple times, and that can extend into April. So false spring is something you have to pay attention to. Now, these observations and phenology allow us a very good guide, but it doesn't mean we're never going to have frost after that point. So we need to be prepared. I noticed that some apple orchards in our area had some blossoms a couple years ago, and we had a really tough frost one year. And to be able to combat that and not lose their entire harvest for the year, because that's their apples for sale, that's their apple cider, their delicious apple cider donuts. I mean, we want to make sure we protect this, right? Well, they actually have such a huge orchard. They built small fires in the rows between the orchard trees and asked for volunteers to come out. And people signed up to come out and help maintain the fires throughout the night to create enough warmth in the entire orchard to keep the blossoms from falling. Apple blossoms and cherry blossoms. Like cherry blossoms will drop if it goes to 28 degrees or below. It only has to be for like 30 minutes to an hour, and that's enough that they'll fall off the trees and you'll lose your harvest. So people use torpedo heaters and things like that, but if you don't have a lot of torpedo heaters, you can just build small campfires all throughout the orchard and keep the air temperature warm enough that we can keep the apple blossoms from falling. So look out for fake spring, where you have really good signs from your indicator plants that it is time to go ahead and plant, but you might have a frost evening Pay attention to your weather apps, set yourself alerts to let you know if things are gonna drop. And there are a couple things that I do to make it really easy to protect yourself. You can put frost blankets out. If you don't have that fabric for frost blankets, you can just put blankets out. Anything to help protect is a good idea. The other thing that you can use are, I put hoops in, I put PVC hoops in my garden and put plastic over top. Do not do this unless you are fully committed to going outside in the morning and taking that plastic off. Because what it does to help heat up and maintain that heat overnight, it'll also provide a lens to burn your plants during the day. So make sure that you are committed to going outside and pulling those off if you want to use that. You can also use a cloche, and you don't have to have glass cloches in order to be successful. You can make them out of milk jugs. Just cut the bottom of your milk jug off, put it down over top of your plant, and take the cap off during the day. But if you know that you're gonna have a frosty evening, it's gonna be pretty cold, just go put that cap on. Again, you need to be committed to coming out in the morning and removing that cap so that we don't trap heat in there and burn the plant. But if you just remove the milk cap off the top of it, it'll provide like a little chimney, allowing the majority of the heat to escape so we don't burn the plant, but protecting it at the same time. And this is a very short period of time that this has to happen. Usually by the time the plant grows too big to fit inside the milk jug, we're past that frost time anyway, so you're usually safe. And I'm gonna leave you with one more old wives' tale here at the end of the video, and that is that generally it is said that you will have 3 snows after your forsythia bloom. Well, I'm looking outside and it is gorgeous. I mean, I was barefoot out there a little bit ago. So I hope that's not the case because I can't stand winter and I don't really want any snow, but I'll accept a little bit of rain to make sure that we keep the garden well watered, but I could do without the snow. Well, happy gardening, and I hope you enjoy the study of phenology as much as I do.